They say the calmest neighborhoods hide the loudest secrets. That thought crossed my mind as I eased the black utility truck into position on Sycamore Drive, dead center of Pine Hollow. A suburb so meticulously maintained, you could cut your finger on the edge of a lawn. The truck wasn't marked, but it didn't need to be. Anyone who knew what to look for would notice the reinforced bumpers, the small antenna array along the roofline, and the unusually heavy rear compartment. To most, it looked like a contractor's rig. To the Bureau, it was a mobile surveillance hub. I parked it exactly where we planned, 3 houses down from the target property, outside what looked like an ordinary single-family home, with solar panels and a Prius in the driveway. The man inside, though, was anything but ordinary. He was the linchpin of a fraud and identity theft operation that spanned 7 states. Our team had traced shell companies' burner phones and digital footprints to this sleepy cul-de-sac, and now we were ready to move. But then came her. I hadn't even turned off the ignition before I saw the figure storming across the street, a clipboard tucked under one arm like it was a badge. Early 50s bleached blonde hair coiled into a perfect helmet of disapproval cardigan over a floral blouse, and the unmistakable stride of a woman who believed she owned every blade of grass in sight. Karen Delaney. I'd heard about her before the mission, an overzealous HOA president known for reporting Christmas lights that stayed up past January, fining residents for overwatering and threatening to sue a man for hanging a flagpole bracket without written approval. Now she was marching straight toward a federal operation. I cracked the window. "You can't park there," she said immediately. No greeting, no hesitation. Just that flat HOA tone, engineered to crush resistance. "Excuse me," I asked, keeping my voice neutral. "This is Pine Hollow HOA territory. You can't just bring a construction vehicle and park it wherever you want. We have rules." I almost smiled. She had no idea. "I won't be long," I said calmly. "That's not the point," she snapped. "It's an eyesore. And frankly, we've had issues with people doing unlicensed work here. You need to move, now." I turned away, pretending to fiddle with a clipboard of my own, while simultaneously checking the timecode on the encrypted laptop beside me. My comms were live, my earpiece buzzing with quiet confirmation from the team down the block. We were 6 minutes from go. Karen wasn't finished. "I'm the president of the HOA," she declared, "and I'm authorized to call the sheriff if you don't comply." I looked back at her and said nothing. That's what broke her. "You think you're above the law?" she hissed. "I will call the police." I wanted to tell her that I was the law, but not yet. She pulled out her phone and began filming. "This is an illegal vehicle parked in a private neighborhood," she said into her phone. "I've asked him to leave. He's refusing. This is being documented." "Ma'am," I said evenly, "you should probably go back inside." That only made her angrier. "You don't tell me what to do in my neighborhood." I kept one hand on the laptop and the other near the console where a secondary badge and radio sat just out of her sight. Inside the earpiece, I heard Team Alpha in position. Confirming visual on suspect entering garage. 3 minutes, that's all I needed. But Karen was already dialing 911. I watched her walk back across the street while talking to dispatch. "Yes, he's parked in front of 4499 Sycamore. It's a black truck, no markings. Suspicious equipment inside. He's refusing to identify himself. Yes, I feel threatened." I rolled my eyes. Seconds later, I heard the voice in my ear. "Surveillance status." I pressed the button discreetly and replied, "Stall at front. Target still stationary. Be advised, local units en route 911, call from HOA." There was a pause. Then, "Copy. Hold position. Don't engage unless compromised." I nodded, even though no one could see me. My pulse stayed level. It wasn't the first time I'd been mistaken for the bad guy. But it was the first time a neighborhood busybody might derail a federal raid, because I violated parking rules. 5 minutes later, 2 patrol cruisers turned into the cul-de-sac, lights flashing but no sirens. Karen stood at the end of her driveway, waving them down like she was directing traffic in a war zone. "They're here for you," she sneered, pointing as they stepped out. "He's been sitting there filming, refusing to identify himself." The younger of the two officers approached my window cautiously. I rolled it down. "Sir, can I ask what you're doing here?" I pulled out my credentials slowly and flipped them open. "Special Agent Jack Monroe, FBI. You're walking into an active federal operation." The officer blinked, then took a step back. "You're kidding." "No," I said. "I need you to keep this perimeter clear, now." Behind him, Karen's face shifted from smug satisfaction to panic. FBI, she stammered. "That's ridiculous." He didn't say anything. He looked like a construction worker. The officer turned and said, "Ma'am, please step back." "But he parked without a permit," she shouted. "That's our street. This is our neighborhood." I stepped out of the vehicle. Not aggressively, just enough for her to see the full badge, the sidearm, the earpiece, and the calm that comes from knowing you have complete authority. "Ma'am, I said you've interfered with an active federal investigation. Had you approached the wrong vehicle at the wrong time, you could have jeopardized the lives of agents on site. I suggest you return to your home immediately." Her mouth opened, closed, and then opened again. But no sound came. She backed away slowly. One of the officers turned to Mai. "What do you need from us? Block both ends of the street. Make sure nobody else comes near. We're moving in 2 minutes." They nodded and sprang into action. Back inside the truck, I checked the final green light on the laptop. The team was in position. The raid would happen on schedule. And Karen, she stood on her porch now clutching her phone like it might save her from the embarrassment about to come. Because in less than 5 minutes, she and the rest of Pine Hollow would witness a scene no HOA pamphlet had ever prepared them for. When the raid began, it was almost anticlimactic. There were no explosions, no shouting. Just the precision of trained federal agents doing exactly what they'd rehearsed. Quiet, swift, surgical. 2 black SUVs rolled in from opposite ends of the street, boxing in the block. Men in tactical gear flowed out like water, moving with silent urgency. They didn't shout commands. They didn't need to. Within seconds, the suspect's house was surrounded. Breach tools came out. The door was popped like a soda tab. Inside the truck, I watched it all on the surveillance feed, split screens showing agents clearing rooms, confirming the presence of digital equipment, and securing 3 adult males in the living room, all caught red-handed. One of them wore a Pine Hollow Joggers Club sweatshirt. The operation was nearly textbook. Clean, minimal resistance, except for Karen. The moment she saw the team enter the house, she came barreling back down her driveway, phone still in hand, yelling, "What is happening? What is this? You can't just do that. This is private property." I stepped out of the truck just as 2 agents exited the target home with the primary suspect in cuffs. He was older than I expected, mid-50s, neatly dressed, barefoot. His face blank, defeated. Karen saw him and gasped. "Is that... Oh my God, that's George. George Whitfield from the HOA Finance Committee." Her voice cracked halfway through, whether from shock or shame I couldn't tell. She turned to me. "Why didn't you tell me I wouldn't have called the police?" "You didn't give me the chance," I replied flatly. "I just thought you were..." She faltered, eyes darting to the truck, the gear the now blocked cul-de-sac, some contractor. "You thought I didn't belong. I was following the rules." "No," I said. "You were following your rules, not the law. And certainly not the truth." An agent brushed past us holding an evidence bag full of external hard drives and stacks of cash. Karen stared at it, like she'd never seen criminality before. In her eyes, violations looked like overgrown hedges or unapproved garden gnomes. She never imagined the real threat might come from someone with manicured grass and a perfect porch swing. Another neighbor stepped onto their lawn phone in hand, recording everything. Karen turned her voice barely above a whisper. "You're not going to make this public, are you?" I didn't answer. I didn't have to. 2 hours later, it was public. The FBI's media office issued a statement confirming the raid. Local news picked it up with a headline so surreal it practically wrote itself. "FBI arrests Pine Hollow resident in identity theft ring. Raid interfered by HOA president." They didn't name Karen, but the video clips did. There she was, red-faced, shouting, pointing, circulating on Facebook and Twitter before nightfall. One clip was slowed down, her voice, distorted for effect, captioned, "Ma'am, this is a federal investigation." It became a meme, overnight. Meanwhile, inside the bureau, the fallout wasn't just comedic. It was a topic of serious review. Because what Karen had done, intentionally or not, was interfere with an active operation. That's obstruction. Still, we didn't press charges. Not this time. Why? Because some mistakes teach themselves, and watching your reputation dissolve online is its own kind of sentence. A week passed. Karen stopped appearing at HOA meetings. She pulled down her holiday wreath, stopped doing her afternoon patrols. One neighbor told me she was taking time off to reflect. Another said she was meeting with lawyers, but she hadn't learned her lesson. Because then came the complaint, filed directly to the Bureau, typed, formal, 2 pages long. It accused me by name of posing as a contractor to evade HOA regulations, bringing unmarked surveillance equipment into a residential area without proper notification, and creating psychological distress through hostile government presence. She tried to flip the story, paint herself as the victim. And this time it wasn't just laughable. It was dangerous. Because when you file a formal complaint against a federal agent, it triggers an internal inquiry. I was pulled into a conference room 2 days later with my supervisor, Agent Laura Bennett, and a Bureau legal liaison. Jack Laura said gently, "We know this is nonsense, but we have to document everything. Just walk us through it." So I did. I laid out the timeline. I submitted the body cam footage from the patrol officers. I included the clip of Karen calling 911 and stating I feel threatened because of his truck. And then I played the part that sealed the deal the moment when Karen, still holding her phone, looked straight at me and said, "You think you're above the law," right before the local officers arrived. The legal liaison sighed, clicked her pen and said, "She doesn't have a leg to stand on. Still, protocol is protocol." I was placed on temporary desk duty while the paperwork cleared. I wasn't angry. Not yet. But the audacity of it, that after interfering with an operation, after having no remorse, Karen would still try to use bureaucracy as a weapon. It sparked something in me, and I decided I wasn't going to just defend my name. I was going to expose hers. I still had access to public documents, so I started digging. Not into her criminal background, there wasn't one, but into her HOA reign. The complaints, the board meeting recordings, the way she fined a veteran for flying a flag, the way she threatened single parents over trampoline permits, the way she rewrote HOA rules without votes, forged meeting minutes, and billed people for nuisance assessments that didn't exist in the original charter. I compiled it all, and I submitted it not to the Bureau, to the residents of Pine Hollow. Karen was still pacing across the sidewalk, phone glued to her ear, muttering phrases like non-compliant vehicle and refusing to identify himself. Her voice was shrill enough to pierce the calm of the neighborhood and just loud enough to mask the low crackle in my earpiece. "Alpha team ready. Visual on target. Confirm final." I gave a discreet double click on my mic. Confirm. But I wasn't alone anymore. Red and blue lights danced across the manicured hedges. A local patrol car rolled into the cul-de-sac, followed quickly by a second. The first officer out was young, mid-20s, probably still new enough to take 911 calls at face value. The second looked older, more seasoned. His face calm but cautious, scanned everything like a man trained to detect when something didn't fit. Karen waved them over with theatrical urgency. Officer, she called. "Thank you for responding so quickly. I don't know who he is, but he parked this truck in front of one of our properties, possibly casing the place. I don't know, and he's refusing to give his name." The younger cop approached my truck with one hand resting on his duty belt. I didn't move yet, just watched him through the window as he slowed and took in the scene, the truck, the cables, the laptop, glowing faintly. Then me. I rolled down the window before he knocked. "Sir, I'm going to need to see some ID," he said. I didn't hesitate. Reaching slowly into the glove box, I pulled out my credentials, federal issue leather case badge on one side, Department of Justice ID on the other. Special Agent Jack Monroe, FBI. I said, voice steady, "You've just arrived at an active federal surveillance operation. Your arrival was expected, though not ideal." He blinked, then read my badge again. "You're with the Bureau, yes. We're 2 minutes from initiating a warrant-executed raid on the property 3 houses down. Your arrival was due to a civilian calling in a suspicious vehicle." Behind him, Karen tilted her head like she hadn't heard correctly. "I'm sorry," what she asked, stepping closer. "Did he just say The older officer stepped between us, subtly raising a hand. Ma'am, I'm going to need you to return to your property. Return to know I called this in. This is my right. This truck isn't authorized. It's violating HOA regulations. You can't just let random people. He's not random, the older officer said quietly but firmly, and he's not violating anything. Karen's jaw dropped. The younger officer turned back to me. Is this a high-risk warrant? It's a precision arrest. Suspect is involved in interstate identity theft and digital fraud targeting federal employees. We've tracked him for 7 months. The cop gave a low whistle, then stepped back. You need backup, no. We need you to clear the area. That includes her. He nodded, turned and walked briskly toward Karen, who had stopped filming and was now staring at me like I had grown a second head. You lied to me, she hissed. You said nothing. You parked here like you owned the place. I didn't lie, I replied, stepping out of the vehicle. I told you I wouldn't be long. That was the truth. You just didn't listen. She took a step back. Her eyes scanned my vest, FBI clearly stitched across the front. The earpiece. The sidearm. The facade of control she'd built in this neighborhood through fear fines and HOA authority was crumbling fast, and she knew it. You can't raid someone's house like this, she said, a last-ditch protest. There are procedures. There are residents watching. There are rules. I looked her dead in the eye. There are laws, ma'am. And your neighbor's been breaking them for years. Before she could answer, a voice came through my earpiece again. Final confirmation. Subject re-entered structure. All units ready. I keyed the mic. Alpha green. Execute. In the next second, the silence shattered. 2 black SUVs roared around the corner and boxed in the cul-de-sac. Their doors flew open as tactical agents poured out, weapons drawn but angled downward. The strike team moved as a single organism, tight, practiced, relentless. Karen screamed, "Oh my God, what is this? What is this?" Her phone was out again, filming even as officers ordered her to get back. She kept yelling. One of the neighbors stepped out in slippers, stunned. Another was already on his porch, jaw hanging open. Then a loud metallic clang as the front door of the target house was breached with a hydraulic ram. FBI search warrant. Voices echoed from within. Clear right hallway, clear downstairs, secure in less than 40 seconds. The entire property was under control. And Karen, she was standing in her driveway, phone shaking in her hand, still filming like it gave her power. But the only thing her camera captured now was justice in motion. Karen stood frozen in her driveway, her mouth half open as if the sheer absurdity of the situation had paralyzed her vocal cords. The woman who had marched toward me just minutes ago, with HOA bylaws and imaginary authority, now clutched her phone like a crucifix, whispering, "This is insane. This is not allowed." But it was, and it was happening. The street was sealed off. The SUVs formed a silent perimeter, their matte black bodies reflecting nothing but grim purpose. Agents in tactical gear swept the property, methodically, voices clipped and efficient. I watched one of them signal from the upper floor window, target secured. Inside my earpiece, primary suspect in custody, 2 additional occupants located. No resistance. Collecting digital evidence now. I gave a low exhale. Not relief, focus. The target house, an unassuming taupe-colored single-family home with perfect hedges, was a front for a digital laundering ring we'd been tracking across multiple states. Stolen identities, ghost refund claims, federal employee data breaches. And it was all being funneled through this suburban facade nestled among barbecues and block parties. Karen's voice returned like a mosquito at dusk. "You can't just do this. You don't have jurisdiction here. This is private property. This is HOA-regulated land." Her volume rose with every line, as if sheer force of personality might override federal authority. "Ma'am," I said, approaching her calmly but directly, "you are not in charge here. You are not involved in this investigation. And you have already interfered with a lawful operation." She scoffed. "Interfered? I protected this neighborhood. I stopped you when you parked illegally. I prevented. You nearly blew a federal takedown." I cut in sharply. "Do you have any idea what could have happened if the target had been alerted, if he had panicked, armed himself, or destroyed evidence because of your actions?" Karen blinked rapidly. "I didn't know." "You didn't tell me, you didn't ask. You assumed." And that, more than anything, was her first real stumble. The pause. The hesitation, the moment where her mouth opened, but no justification came out. Across the street, residents began gathering in hushed clusters. Most were barefoot in pajamas, or robes holding mugs, phones, or confused children. One man muttered, "Is that George Whitfield's house?" Another whispered, "Holy hell, is this really the FBI?" A child maybe 9 pointed toward me and whispered, "Mom, I thought he was just the electrician guy." Karen turned in a slow circle, realizing the entire cul-de-sac was watching not just me, but her. And for once, she was the disturbance. Behind us, agents exited the house with the primary suspect in cuffs. He was surprisingly calm, as if he knew the game was over the moment he saw the gear roll up. One agent carried 3 black laptops sealed in evidence bags. Another followed with 2 cell phones and a bundle of what looked like burner SIM cards and encrypted flash drives. The older officer from earlier, now leaning against his patrol car, looked over at me. "You guys always roll this deep?" he asked, half smiling. When the guys got over 200 identities stored in his garage, I said we bring the whole parade. Karen stepped forward again. "I demand to speak to your supervisor. I'm filing a complaint with the city, the HOA Council, the FBI, someone. My supervisor's at the mobile command post," I replied. "And you're welcome to file whatever paperwork you want, but I suggest you wait until after the suspect is processed. And after you consult your own HOA charter." "Why would I need to do that?" I paused. "Because nothing in that charter gives you the right to detain, film, harass, or interfere with federal personnel conducting lawful surveillance. You might want to run that by your legal committee." Her face reddened to a color somewhere between rage and disbelief. The crowd behind her was growing. No one spoke loudly, but the phones were up now. A few were filming her. She saw it. She turned toward her porch, then paused, glanced back, and hissed in a low voice only I could hear. "This isn't over." I didn't flinch. "You're right. It's just starting." Inside my earpiece, evidence collection complete. Units exfiltrating. Another voice followed. "We got the backup drives. You were right about the shed." I turned to the patrol officers. "You're good to clear the outer ring. We're done here." They nodded, moving to ease the growing crowd back toward their homes. One agent leaned in as we loaded the last of the gear into the truck. "She always liked that," I nodded. "Worse." "That was her restrained." He shook his head. "Glad I don't live here." I almost laughed. "That makes 2 of us." As the SUVs peeled out one by one, Karen stood on her lawn, rigid, trembling not with fear, but with fury. She wasn't embarrassed. She wasn't enlightened. She was angry. Because for the first time since she'd crowned herself Queen of Pine Hollow, she had no power. And worse, no audience that believed in it anymore. The raid was over. The suspect was in custody, but Karen, she was just getting started. We left the neighborhood in near silence, just the low rumble of engines and the occasional creak of tactical gear being stowed. But the real noise came hours later, long after the cuffs had clicked and the hard drives had been bagged. That night in the FBI field office, I stood in the operations room under a haze of cold fluorescent light, watching digital forensics analysts pull open the first layers of data from the evidence we seized. And what we found made the initial charges look like child's play. George Whitfield, the man Karen had so furiously defended with her HOA tantrum, wasn't just running identity theft schemes from his garage. He was coordinating a network that targeted government pension systems, veterans' benefits, and encrypted federal payroll platforms. He had spreadsheets with thousands of stolen IDs, faces, dates of birth, social security numbers, even biometric scans from old government clearance databases. He wasn't a petty criminal. He was a threat to national security. And he had been living just down the block from the woman who'd called the cops on an FBI truck because she didn't like where it was parked. The room fell quiet as the lead analyst muttered, "My God, this guy had access to classified contractor data." Another added, "Some of this looks like preliminary frameworks for synthetic identities." He wasn't just stealing names. He was building people. A knot twisted in my stomach. Not from fear, from fury. We'd almost lost this. Karen's interference, her obsession with enforcing parking rules and lawn decor standards, nearly torpedoed one of the most sensitive operations we'd run this year. And she had no clue. But the residents of Pine Hollow were starting to understand. That morning, the local news stations picked up the story. A brief, cautious report at first. FBI arrests Pine Hollow resident in major identity theft case. Federal agents executed a warrant early yesterday morning in connection with a multi-state digital fraud investigation. No injuries reported. But by midday, it evolved. Suspect allegedly targeted federal workers and veteran accounts. Neighbors described the raid as intense but orderly. Some residents say the Homeowners Association attempted to interfere with the operation, mistaking an FBI vehicle for an unpermitted contractor truck. That last sentence, it spread like wildfire. Clips from the raid began surfacing online on grainy smartphone videos from the neighbors. Most were shaky, taken through blinds or phone cameras peeking over fences. But in almost every one, the same thing stood out: Karen. Her voice, her finger pointing, her angry escalating shrieks about rules and violations. One video, only 18 seconds long, went viral within hours. It showed Karen standing in her robe, arms crossed, shouting, "You can't park here. I don't care who you are. This is HOA property." Cut to the agent beside her calmly replying, "Ma'am, that man is under federal arrest." The video ended with Karen screaming, "I'm calling the real police." The internet had a field day. Within 24 hours, tickers reenacted the scene with wigs and toy badges. Reddit lit up with memes. HOA Karen versus the FBI trended under r/justice served. One video dubbed her with Darth Vader's voice. Another inserted her into scenes from Breaking Bad. But outside the internet, something else was brewing. The residents of Pine Hollow, those who had been fined for potted plants, who'd had their kids written up for sidewalk chalk, who'd been told their mailbox paint was non-compliant, were no longer amused. They were angry. And I got the first real sign of it that evening when a printed note appeared in my mailbox. It read, "Dear Agent Monroe, I'm a longtime resident of Pine Hollow. I've seen Karen intimidate, overreach, and divide this community for years. We thought she was just overzealous. We were wrong. Thank you for showing us what real authority looks like, and more importantly, for doing it with restraint. We're calling a vote, no name. Just a neat signature, Lot 32. Within 48 hours, flyers began appearing on doorsteps and neighborhood bulletin boards. Emergency HOA meeting, Saturday 5:00 p.m. Community Clubhouse agenda, vote of no confidence. Karen Delaney, residents only. No proxies, no outside counsel. Karen tried to fight back, of course. She sent out one of her signature HOA-wide emails, complete with caps lock threats and a PDF attachment labeled FBI misconduct and resident rights. She claimed she'd been harassed, that the raid had endangered the sanctity of Pine Hollow, that she had been the one protecting the neighborhood. But the tone had shifted. No one replied. No one echoed her indignation, because now they'd seen what she really was: a small person hiding behind big rules. And worse, a person who, when confronted with actual danger, had targeted the people stopping it. That Saturday, the parking lot at the clubhouse was full. People came early. Neighbors who hadn't spoken to each other in years shook hands, exchanged stories, even smiled. There was tension, yes, but it was the kind that precedes change. The kind that says, we know what's coming, and we're ready to face it. And at the center of it all was Karen standing at the front of the room, clutching a folder, her composure cracking like glass under pressure. She was about to face the people she had ruled over. But this time, they had the evidence, and I had a seat in the back row. Karen stood behind the podium at the front of the Pine Hollow clubhouse, her hands clenching the sides, as if the weight of her control over the neighborhood could somehow be held there. But the room was no longer hers. Gone were the days when people averted their eyes in fear of citations or fines. Tonight they met her stare, without flinching. She tried anyway. Clearing her throat, she began with a practiced tone, sharp-clipped, the kind of voice honed over years of HOA meetings where only hers mattered. I want to begin, she said, by reminding everyone that we are a community governed by structure, by order. What happened earlier this week, what some of you think you witnessed, was chaos. Federal agents storming our homes, vehicles parked without notice, strangers entering our neighborhood with no regard for our safety, and I was the only one who tried to protect us. A few people in the back laughed under their breath. She heard them. Her eyes narrowed. Yes, I called the police. she continued. Yes, I questioned an unmarked vehicle. And I would do it again. Because when no one else was asking questions, I was. At that moment, she believed she was regaining ground. She wasn't. Because the room had shifted. They weren't afraid of her anymore. And in that vacuum, truth was moving in fast. Douglas McRee, the acting HOA president, and a longtime resident himself, stepped to the side of the podium, calm, patient, clipboard in hand. Karen, he said gently, this meeting was not called to hear your defense. You've already emailed it. Twice. Her lips tightened. This meeting, he continued, turning to the crowd, was called by over 40 residents to address a pattern of behavior, including interference with law enforcement, misuse of HOA funds, and unauthorized citations, all of which have been documented and verified. Karen turned to him. You're siding with him, aren't you, the outsider? The contractor who tricked us all. That's when I stood. Not dramatically. No badge, no vest. Just jeans, a shirt, and a man who'd seen too many people like her mistake rules for righteousness. I never lied, I said. You just didn't ask the right questions. Karen's gaze snapped to me like a switchblade. You parked illegally, she said. You set up surveillance in a residential zone. You endangered families. No. I cut in voice even. You endangered families because while we were executing a federal warrant on a man who was stealing the identities of veterans and public servants, you were yelling about a driveway. You threatened to call the police on a federal agent, and then after it was over, you sent a formal complaint to the FBI's Office of Professional Responsibility, accusing me of harassment. Gasps spread through the room. Douglas blinked. You filed a complaint against him? Karen's mouth opened, closed. She looked cornered for the first time. He was parked without a permit, she said weakly. I didn't know. I nodded. But then, instead of owning the mistake, you tried to rewrite the story. You accused me of misconduct. You accused the Bureau of violating your personal space. And now you're standing here hoping we'll forget that the only reason George Whitfield was caught is because we didn't listen to you. Silence, a long one. Then Ellen Harper, gray hair glasses, pink sweater, stood near the back. My daughter was one of the victims, she said. Her identity was stolen while she was in the Navy. She's still cleaning it up. You think your pride matters more than that? Karen didn't answer. Then Mark Alvarez, in his 40s, raised his voice. You fined me $200 for leaving my trash bins out on a Sunday. I was in the hospital. You didn't even ask why. Another. You tried to evict my dog because you said he was too loud. You stood outside my window with a stopwatch. Another, you told my wife she couldn't hang a pride flag because it violated symmetry on the porch. Voices layered now, one on top of another. A reckoning not vengeful, not cruel, but honest, raw. A community finding its voice again after being silenced by citations and cold notices. Karen trembled. I was doing my job, she said finally. I was maintaining order. Douglas looked around the room, then back at her. No, he said. You were maintaining control. He took the clipboard. Motion on the floor, removal of Karen Delaney from all HOA positions. Effective immediately, including president, board member, and community compliance officer. Vote will be by show of hands. I didn't need to count. Nearly every hand rose, some slowly, others with force. Only Karen's remained at her side. She turned her face away as if the vote stung more than the words, but she didn't argue, not this time. She gathered her folder, straightened her cardigan, and walked out. No applause, no jeering, just the sound of a door closing behind a woman who had for so long acted like the door belonged to her. Douglas took a breath. Meeting adjourned. I stepped outside into the warm dusk, the street still and golden. The same houses, the same trees. But everything felt different. Sophia Bennett, walking on her dog, passed by and nodded. Thank you, she said. For everything. I didn't say much, just smiled. The way you do when justice doesn't roar, but lands quietly, like morning light. I thought it would fade. That after the arrest, after Karen's removal, and after the dust settled from the emergency HOA meeting, Pine Hollow would quietly return to its pretense of peace. But nothing in the digital age ever really fades. Not when there's a camera, a headline, or a woman in slippers screaming at federal agents in 1080p. Karen's outburst, captured on no fewer than 6 phones, spread faster than any official bureau press release ever could. Local channels replayed the footage on a loop, always cutting right at the moment she shrieked, "You can't park here," before the camera panned to a line of armed agents storming George Whitfield's house. But it wasn't just local. 3 days later, I woke up to a headline on my phone's news app: HOA Karen versus the FBI neighborhood crackdown. Turns viral sensation. Washington Sentinel Online. Beneath it was a grainy screenshot of me standing in my vest, calmly showing my badge, while Karen pointed, like a prosecutor, at a bake sale. I groaned aloud. In my line of work, anonymity is a luxury, and one I had fought to maintain for years. Now I was a meme. My inbox was flooded. Coworkers sent gifts. Even Agent Laura Bennett called with a chuckle in her voice. "You've gone viral, Monroe. I hope you like being famous." "I liked being quiet," I said. She laughed. "Too late for that now. You're trending higher than congressional subpoenas," and she wasn't wrong. Someone on TikTok turned the footage into a slow-motion clip set to dramatic classical music. It hit 1 million views in 24 hours. Comments poured in. "She tried to HOA the FBI. I'm dead. This man's calm deserves an Oscar." Plot twist. She's the final boss in Neighborhood Simulator 2024. I'd pay to see this as a Netflix docuseries. There were even parody accounts at FBI Truck Guy, at Karen V's The Badge, and my personal least favorite at that No Parking Zone. At first, I wanted to ignore it, let the moment pass. But something strange started happening amid the laughter and the jokes. People began talking. About overreach. About HOAs that had become miniature kingdoms. About the way small power left unchecked could spiral into something far worse. I received messages from people in Florida, Arizona, even Canada. "Thank you. I'm fighting my HOA right now for towing my car while I was at the hospital with my dad. Ours fined us for putting up a Halloween decoration on October 1st. Your story gave us the courage to speak up. I've saved your clip in case my board ever tries to get bold." What had started as a neighborhood incident had become a catalyst. Karen wasn't the only one of her kind. There were dozens, maybe hundreds, just like her, clinging to bylaws like weapons, wielding control under the illusion of order. And now they were on notice. But the backlash wasn't only digital. It landed right back in Pine Hollow. At the next HOA board meeting, the room was packed again, but this time there were reporters, not just locals. A national news crew set up across the street, interviewing residents under blooming dogwood trees. One of them, Mark Alvarez, in a flannel shirt, summed it up best. "I didn't move here for drama. I moved here to retire in peace, but peace doesn't mean silence. It means fairness. And what happened here, that was long overdue." Karen, of course, didn't attend. Her house sat quiet now. Curtains drawn. No wreath on the door. No clipboard. No folded flyers stuck under windshield wipers about upcoming mandatory shrub height reviews. Just stillness. But the HOA board made it official. They voted unanimously to implement reforms. Transparent voting for new rules. A public appeals process for citations. And most notably, the Karen Clause, unofficially named, but known to all, which prohibited any HOA board member from unilaterally contacting law enforcement or city agencies without full board approval and documentation. Someone joked they should install a plaque. The neighborhood began to shift, not dramatically, but steadily. People smiled more, walked their dogs a little longer. Kids chalked rainbows on the sidewalks again without fear of fines. A few even asked me if I'd stay longer, maybe buy a house here now that things were improving. I didn't say yes, but I didn't say no either. One evening, as I returned to my borrowed truck parked legally in the same spot as before, Mia Torres passed by on a scooter. She stopped, looked up at me, and grinned. "You're the guy, right?" she said. "The FBI parking guy." I smiled, shook my head. "I guess so." "Cool," she said, kicking off again. "Thanks for standing up to that lady." She made me cry once about our mailbox. I watched her ride off down the block, freedom in her movement. That night, I sat on the tailgate of the truck and looked up at the stars. What started as a routine operation had turned into something bigger, an unintentional stand not just against one person, but against a mindset. The kind that confuses control with leadership, that uses authority to silence instead of serve. And now the country was talking, not just about Karen, but about justice in driveways, on sidewalks, under porch lights. Within a week, Pine Hollow looked the same: lawns, freshly trimmed mailboxes evenly spaced, garden beds compliant, but the atmosphere had shifted completely. The invisible tensions that had ruled the neighborhood for years, one shaped by Karen's rigid enforcement, her fines, her passive-aggressive HOA notices, was gone. And in its place, accountability, transparency, a subtle growing sense of relief. But beneath that surface calm, something more complex was unraveling inside the HOA itself. I was invited quietly to a special board session held behind closed doors, not to intervene, but to provide a summary report on the events surrounding the operation and Karen's subsequent interference. It was procedural, but I knew the subtext. They wanted to know just how close they had come to being part of a federal embarrassment. The meeting was held in the HOA's upstairs conference room, once Karen's domain. Now stripped of her framed certificates and pompous slogans, Civitas per Ordines, still faintly visible where the letters had been torn from the wall, the room felt exposed. Douglas McRee, now acting president by unanimous support, began the session. He sat at the head of the table, his hands folded, voice calm but firm. Agent Monroe, thank you for joining us again. Before we proceed to revisions, we'd like to hear your account off the record for the purposes of internal review. I nodded. I wasn't required to participate, but I wanted to, because I believed that how they moved forward mattered as much as that they were moving forward. So I told them everything. I laid out how the operation had been coordinated in silence for months, how we had traced digital fingerprints back to Pine Hollow, how surveillance was deployed with minimal disruption until Karen inserted herself. I explained that while her actions had not technically violated federal law, they had endangered the timing of the raid and put herself and others at risk. Her refusal to comply, her harassment, and her formal complaint to the FBI had not only wasted time, but forced an internal inquiry, one that had burned through hours of personnel interviews and paperwork. No one spoke while I detailed it. They all listened. Some looked ashamed, some angry. When I finished, Douglas exhaled and said, I think I speak for everyone here when I say we failed to act sooner. And we allowed that failure to be weaponized. Then he turned to the rest of the board. We're not here just to remove Karen. That's done. We're here to dismantle the structure she built, the unchecked power, the rules made, in isolation, the fines levied without transparency. There were murmurs of agreement. Clarice Nguyen added, she fined my brother's family $75 for having a tent in their backyard for a sleepover. That was the moment I knew she wasn't protecting anything, she was punishing. Over the next hour, I sat quietly, while the board did something I never thought I'd witness in a room like that. They rewrote themselves. They repealed 11 bylaws Karen had pushed through without full community votes. They established a 3-vote rule: no citation could be issued without majority board approval and a written record. They created a community review committee made up of rotating non-board residents to oversee HOA financial transparency. And they passed something called the Resident Respect Clause, banning any board member from using their position to target, intimidate, or surveil other residents. Someone even joked about installing a cardboard cutout of Karen in the clubhouse with a speech bubble that read, "Did you file a motion or just make it up?" The laughter was a release, not of cruelty, but of weight. When the meeting ended, Douglas walked me out. We don't deserve a second chance, he said, but we're going to earn one anyway. I nodded. Start with your neighbors. The rest will follow. He looked at me for a long moment. You ever consider joining a neighborhood? I smirked. Not one with a board. He laughed. Fair enough. That weekend, the community held its first real event in years, a block party. No sign-up sheet, no flyer approval. Just people gathering on their lawns, sharing food, kids running wild with bubble guns, and sidewalk chalk. Someone even made t-shirts. I survived HOA Karen Spring 25 edition. They handed me one. I accepted it, wore it, laughed. And that's when I saw her, Karen, driving past in a silver sedan, slowly, carefully, windows up. Her expression unreadable. She didn't stop, didn't wave, just watched the neighborhood she'd once ruled begin to heal without her. Maybe she thought she was the victim. Maybe she was drafting another complaint somewhere. But it didn't matter anymore. Because for once her voice didn't shape the day. The sun set over Pine Hollow with the sound of kids laughing, neighbors clinking glasses, and music echoing between the rooftops. And not a single person complained about where anyone had parked. The vote had removed Karen. The policies had changed. The parties had returned. But closure, I've learned, doesn't always come with a signature or applause. Sometimes it waits, quiet, patient, for one final reckoning. It came 2 weeks later. I was at the small neighborhood cafe, just a converted garage, with 2 umbrella tables out front, grabbing coffee before heading into the field office. The morning was slow, sun low and warm. I had just taken a seat when I heard the unmistakable sound of heels sharp, deliberate on the pavement. I didn't have to look. Agent Monroe Karen Delaney said. Her voice was thinner than before. Less steel, more strain. She wore the same pristine sweater set, but the edges seemed softer now, as if the fabric knew it wasn't armor anymore. I looked up slowly. Karen. She stood there a moment, as if unsure what to do with her hands, now that they didn't have a clipboard. May I sit? I gestured toward the chair across from me. Your HOA no longer governs this patio. She smirked just barely. So I've heard. She sat, folded her hands, then stared at mine, as if the badge I wore that day had burned into her memory. I've been thinking a lot, she began, about everything. The raid, the complaint, the videos. I said nothing. They're calling me HOA Karen online. I nodded. She hesitated. You could have pressed charges, obstruction, interference. You didn't. I sipped my coffee. Didn't need to. Your own neighborhood handled it better than any judge could have. She flinched. Not from the words, from their truth. I thought I was keeping order, she said finally. That's what I told myself. That rules were peace. That silence meant satisfaction. But now, I realized it was just fear. They were afraid of me. They weren't wrong, I said. Her eyes welled, just for a moment. Not the kind of crying you do to be seen. The kind you do when your world stops echoing back your voice and you're forced to listen. I lost everything, she whispered. They don't look at me anymore. People I've lived next to for 15 years. I walk my dog and they turn away. Karen. I said, my tone even you turned away from them a long time ago. What you're feeling now, that's not punishment. That's reflection. She swallowed hard. I didn't know George Whitfield was doing those things, I swear. If I had known it wasn't about George, I interrupted. It was about control. And you didn't lose it. You abused it. Silence stretched between us. The breeze shifted. Then she looked up. So what happens now? Am I just the villain forever? No, I said. You get to choose what you are next, but you don't get to rewrite what happened. She nodded slowly, as if each motion cost her something. I'm moving. Listing the house next week. I wasn't surprised. Her kingdom had crumbled. Her reign ended not with torches, but laughter, and that kind of dethroning stays in the walls. Well, I said, maybe don't move somewhere with an HOA. She gave a short laugh, dry, real resigned. She stood, then paused, uncertain. I know it doesn't mean much, but I'm sorry. For interfering. For assuming. I gave a small nod. It means more than you think. She walked away after that. No drama, no speech, just a woman who had finally stepped away from her podium to sit in her own silence. That afternoon, Douglas called. You'll never guess, he said. She's moving. You already know. We had coffee. He whistled. You're braver than I am. I smiled. No, just stubborn. He paused, then said, The neighborhood's better now. You can feel it. I know, I said. Because they took it back. That weekend, I attended another block gathering. Nothing official. Just lawn chairs, iced tea, and a handful of people learning how to be neighbors again. Sophia Bennett handed me a plate of cookies. Thank you, she said. You gave us our street back. I didn't. They did. I just reminded them it was theirs. As the sun dipped behind the rooftops and laughter echoed down the street, I caught sight of Karen's house, now empty, a small sold sign staked in the yard. No one looked at it anymore. Not with anger. Not with bitterness, just peace. The kind that doesn't come from fines, or rules, or perfectly aligned trash cans. The kind you earn, when the noise fades and people remember how to listen. I stood by my truck watching as the movers carried the last of Karen's boxes into the van. It was early morning dew, still clinging to the grass, the kind of quiet that used to hang heavy over Pine Hollow, not from serenity, but surveillance. Today, the quiet was different. It wasn't afraid. Karen didn't look back. She climbed into the passenger seat beside the driver, not even casting a final glance at the house she once ruled like a fiefdom. And no one came to see her off. Not out of cruelty, but because the chapter had already closed. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. This wasn't just the end of a conflict. It was the conclusion of a transformation for a place, for a group of people, for me. When I'd first pulled onto that cul-de-sac, parking my black truck in front of George Whitfield's house, I hadn't expected anything more than a clean operation, an arrest, a report, a debrief. But I'd gotten far more than I bargained for: a first-hand look into how unchecked power at the smallest level could rot a community from the inside, and how that same community, given truth and tools, could take it back. A few days later, Douglas sent me an email. No subject line, just a photo attachment. It was the HOA bulletin board, freshly painted with a large, new heading: Community, not Control. Beneath it, someone had pinned a printed copy of my truck parked in that now famous driveway. And below that, a laminated card that read, "Sometimes the uninvited guest is the one who saves the party." I chuckled, closed the message, shut my laptop. That weekend, I got a call from Agent Daniel Hayes in Washington. They'd seen the footage, the news reports, the HOA footage that had gone viral. "We're thinking about a new task force," he said. "Property abuse, small-scale corruption, local power, misuse situations that slip through traditional oversight. You interested?" I thought about Pine Hollow. About Clarice Nguyen starting a gardening group, about the kids drawing chalk murals on sidewalks that had once been ticketed for decorative overuse. I thought about Karen quietly driving off into the distance, no longer feared, finally, alone with the weight of her own voice. And I thought about the power of a single parked truck. "Yeah," I said, "I'm interested." Before I left, I dropped by one last time, walked the sidewalk, nodded to neighbors, waved to Douglas, who was repainting a mailbox without measuring tape for the first time in years. At the end of the street, Liam Carter, on a scooter, skidded to a stop in front of me. He pointed to the FBI patch on my duffel bag. "Were you the guy in the truck?" I smiled. "I was." He looked impressed. "My mom says you stopped the bad guys." I nodded. "Your mom's smart." He grinned and zipped off down the street. As I turned back toward my truck, my same black truck, now free of disguise, I felt it settle over me, the sense of work well done, of justice, not just served, but understood. And as I drove away from Pine Hollow for the last time, I glanced in the rearview mirror, not to check for pursuers, but to remember. The street was bathed in golden morning light. Kids played, neighbors talked, a sprinkler danced across someone's front lawn. And for the first time in a long while, no one was watching, just living.